the eternal voice.
If you find yourself drawn to these dark territories of knowledge, consider subscribing to join our circle of seekers. Tonight we attempt something that should not be attempted, the measurement of gods with instruments that dissolve in their presence. We will weigh shadows that cast no reflection, count infinities that refuse enumeration, and speak names that reshape the throat that utters them. Here lies the promise wrapped in velvet and warning. By journey's end, you will understand why power in the Lovecraftian cosmos cannot be measured but only experienced, as the fish experiences the ocean, as the dreamer experiences the dream that dreams them back. You will trace how a sigil carved in basement stone teaches geometry to the house above it, how a word whispered in Providence echoes in dimensions where sound has no meaning. You will learn that to ask how powerful is already to have stepped onto a stage where you are simultaneously audience and actor, observer and observed. The very question pulls you into the phenomenon it seeks to examine, making you complicit in the cosmic machinery you thought to study from safe distance. There is no safe distance. There never was. Each attempt to quantify their influence becomes another vector through which that influence propagates, another channel through which the cosmic signal broadcasts itself into terrestrial awareness. The darkness behind your eyelids has always been inhabited. The silence between your thoughts has always been occupied. Here lies the cost, spoken softly in the first minute. Knowledge of their power is power acting upon you. The question changes the questioner. To measure gods is to discover the units of measurement were always written in your own flesh, your own consciousness, the instrument that breaks under the weight of what it attempts to weigh. This is not metaphor, but mechanic, the key that is also the gate, the veil that is also the void it conceals. Consider the scholar who translates forbidden texts. With each word rendered into familiar language, something renders itself into the translator. The academic who catalogues ancient symbols finds those symbols beginning to catalog her, organizing her thoughts according to principles that predate human civilization. We begin in the theater of the mind, where curtains part to reveal not a stage, but an abyss that has been watching you since before you learned to watch. The entities we will encounter: Azathoth drumming at reality's core, Yog-Sothoth co-extensive with all boundaries, Nyarlathotep wearing masks that are faces that are masks, are not characters in our story, but principles by which stories themselves are possible. Their power is not what they do, but what they are, the grammar of existence, the syntax of space-time, the punctuation that gives meaning to the vast sentence of reality. They do not impose themselves upon unwilling minds, but simply exist as possibilities that, once perceived, cannot be unperceived. Listen for the flutes that play not music but mathematics. In the spaces between heartbeats, alien melodies weave equations that describe the curvature of consciousness itself. Watch for the stars that shine not light but implications. Above familiar constellations, geometries of meaning arrange themselves in patterns that teach new forms of seeing to eyes that dare trace their connections. Feel the fog that carries not moisture but possibility. In the mist that rises from midnight streets, futures and pasts blend into a present that extends in directions for which human language has no names. Taste the copper of the air. Hear the soft clicking of unseen ropes. The first stake lands here. To study them is to join them, not through worship or summoning, but through the simple act of sustained attention. The horror is not sudden but slow, not violent but inevitable, not external but structural. It emerges from the gradual recognition that the boundaries you assumed were absolute between self and cosmos, between observer and observed, between question and answer, were always more porous than you imagined. Each moment of genuine understanding erodes another barrier until the distinction between studying cosmic horror and participating in it becomes meaningless. The stage is set. The audience has taken their seats. The curtain rises on a cosmos where power flows not from above but from beneath, not from without but from within the very foundations of what we mistake for reality. Each chapter that follows will peel away another layer of comfortable illusion, revealing depths that have no bottom and heights that have no summit. You are no longer merely reading about cosmic horror. You have become a participant in its unfolding revelation. The investigation begins with this acknowledgement. You are already inside what you seek to examine. The cosmic entities exist not in some distant realm, but in the spaces between thoughts, in the pauses between words, in the darkness between stars. Their power is the power of recognition itself, the terrifying discovery that consciousness and cosmos are not separate phenomena, but aspects of a single vast intelligence, experiencing itself through infinite perspectives. Before we can measure what should not be measured, we must understand what we are attempting to measure. The entities of Lovecraft's cosmos resist categorization not through deliberate obscurity, but through ontological necessity. They exist in ways that predate and transcend the very concepts we use to organize reality. To speak of their power requires first acknowledging that power itself, as humans understand it, is a local phenomenon, a terrestrial approximation of forces that operate on scales where the distinction between cause and effect dissolves into something far more fundamental. What we perceive as strength, as capability, as influence, are merely shadows cast by relationships that exist at levels of reality our minds were never designed to perceive directly. At the apex of this non-hierarchy sits Azathoth, the nuclear chaos, whose power is not the ability to act, but the condition that makes action possible. He does not rule the cosmos. He is the cosmic background radiation of possibility itself, the primordial substrate from which all potential realities accidentally crystallize. Around his throne, if throne applies to a state of being that encompasses all states, the other gods dance not in worship, but in desperate maintenance, their movements the only thing preventing his awakening, which would not destroy reality, but reveal that reality was always a dream within his unconscious mind. The pipers and drummers who attend him play not melodies, but mathematical relationships. Their alien music, the equations that govern matter and energy across all dimensions. Their performance is not art, but essential maintenance of existence itself. Beneath him, if spatial metaphors retain any meaning, dwell the outer gods, Yog-Sothoth coextensive with all space-time, Shub-Niggurath proliferating through every act of generation, Nyarlathotep serving as the active interface between cosmic indifference and human comprehension. Their power operates through what we might call ontological priority. They do not possess abilities so much as they are the conditions under which abilities become meaningful concepts. Yog-Sothoth does not travel through dimensions. He is dimensionality itself, the principle that makes spatial relationships possible. Shub-Niggurath does not create life. She is the force of generation that manifests as biological reproduction, artistic creation, and the spontaneous emergence of complexity from simplicity. Nyarlathotep does not communicate. He is communication itself, the interface that allows cosmic principles to become comprehensible to terrestrial consciousness. The great old ones, Cthulhu dreaming in R'lyeh, Dagon rising with the tides, Hastur tangled in yellow signs, and theatrical impossibilities represent power that has been localized, constrained by geometry and circumstance. They sleep not from weakness, but from the temporary misalignment of cosmic conditions, their dreams leaking into reality like radiation from a barely contained source. Cthulhu's slumber is not rest, but a form of cosmic maintenance, his unconscious mind broadcasting signals that maintain the coherence of terrestrial reality, while simultaneously preparing it for eventual transformation. His city exists not as a location, but as a state of being, a configuration of space-time that becomes accessible only when proper geometric relationships align across multiple dimensions. Below them move the elder things, the Mygo, the great race of Yith, entities whose power, while vast by human standards, operates within recognizable parameters. They are scientists where the others are natural laws, explorers where the others are the territory itself, wielders of technology where the others are the principles that make technology possible. The elder things built cities and conducted experiments. The Mygo harvest resources and manipulate biological systems. The great race transfers consciousness across temporal boundaries. These are activities that human minds can comprehend, even if the scale and sophistication exceed our current capabilities. This taxonomy reveals the first crucial insight. Power in the Lovecraftian cosmos is not a substance to be possessed, but a relationship to the fundamental structures of existence. The question becomes not how much power do they have, but at what level of reality do they operate. A hurricane is more powerful than a human, but both hurricane and human are weather patterns in the atmospheric system of Azathoth's dreaming mind. The hurricane operates according to meteorological principles, the human according to biological and psychological principles. But both sets of principles emerge from deeper organizational patterns that exist at cosmic scales. The architecture reveals itself through concrete experience. The cold touch of stone in an ancient cellar carries information about geological processes operating across millions of years. The smell of ozone before a storm hints at electromagnetic forces connecting Earth to sky. The sensation of vertigo when looking up at stars reveals spatial relationships that consciousness normally filters out to maintain psychological coherence. These are not supernatural phenomena, but natural responses to information operating according to principles our evolutionary heritage never prepared us to process directly. Each entity represents a different load-bearing element in reality's cosmic structure. Azathoth provides the foundation of unconscious possibility. The outer gods serve as fundamental forces and principles. The great old ones function as regional governors maintaining local stability. The elder species operate as active agents implementing cosmic will through recognizable methodologies. Each level depends upon those above it for the conditions of its existence while simultaneously serving levels below by providing structure and constraint. The metrics we brought, strength, size, speed, crumple like paper programs in rain. The true measures are priority, scope, interface, and temporal relationship. Priority asks where in the ontological stack an entity resides. Scope asks which categories of reality naturally fall under its influence. Interface asks how it becomes legible to minds like ours through dream, mask, music, or impossible angle. Temporal relationship asks how it connects to the flow of causality and cosmic cycles. The architecture of their power is thus revealed as the architecture of reality itself, with each entity occupying a specific role in the cosmic hierarchy that makes resistance not impossible, but meaningless. To understand their influence, we must next examine how this structure transmits itself across the vast distances of space and the even vaster distances of comprehension. How cosmic principles flow through channels that connect mind to mind, dimension to dimension, possibility to actuality. The transmission of cosmic power operates not through physical vectors, but through the far more insidious channels of information and understanding. Unlike earthly contagions that spread through contact or proximity, the influence of the Lovecraftian entities propagates through the simple act of genuine comprehension. To truly understand them is to be changed by them, to become a node in their network of influence that spans dimensions and epochs. The infection travels not through blood or breath, but through meaning itself, carried in the gaps between words, hidden in the implications of equations that describe impossible relationships, encoded in the negative spaces of architectural plans that seem familiar to minds that have never seen their like. You did not catch it, it caught you. You did not read the line read you back, measuring your capacity for transformation with each syllable processed. Consider how the mythos itself has spread through our reality like spores released from some cosmic fruiting body. Lovecraft's stories were not mere fiction, but inadvertent translations of cosmic principles into human language. Each sentence a carrier wave transmitting not just narrative, but the underlying mathematical relationships that govern reality at scales beyond human perception. The author himself may have been unaware of the true nature of what he channeled, believing he crafted tales from imagination while actually serving as a conduit for information that existed long before human consciousness learned to organize itself into stories. Writers who encountered his work, August Derleth with his careful cataloging, Robert Bloch with his urban horrors, Clark Ashton Smith with his decadent visions, found themselves compelled to elaborate upon it, not through conscious choice, but through a form of intellectual infection that demanded expression. Each became a node in the expanding network, their contributions not additions to a fictional universe, but further translations of cosmic principles that required multiple perspectives to approach completeness. The Necronomicon, though fictional in origin, demonstrates this principle with terrifying precision. Lovecraft's invented grimoire has achieved a form of independent existence, functioning less as a book than as a replicating design, an informational parasite with a taste for libraries and late-night printers. Multiple authentic versions appear across decades, each claiming to be the true source while actually serving as different manifestations of the same pattern. The book exists now not as a physical object, but as an informational pattern that uses human minds as its substrate, replicating and evolving through each encounter like lichen etching itself deeper into stone with each damp season. Those who study it, even knowing it to be fictional, report experiences that transcend the boundaries between imagination and perception. Dreams carrying salt-wet pages, encounters with entities described in texts they have never read, the sudden ability to read symbols in languages that predate human civilization. This transmission occurs through what scholars of memetics would recognize as cognitive hazards, ideas that damage the thinking apparatus that processes them. But the Lovecraftian entities represent something more sophisticated. Ontological hazards that damage not just thought, but the fundamental categories through which reality is organized. To learn the true name of Yog-Sothoth is not simply to acquire information, but to restructure one's relationship to space and time, discovering that the boundaries between here and there, between now and then, were always more porous than terrestrial consciousness assumed. To glimpse the geometry of our Aliyah is to discover that Euclidean space was always camouflage, a child's map left taped over a star chart. Ontological hazards do not merely confuse, they reconfigure. They do not break the lens. They polish it to the point that the old world will no longer come into focus. The mechanism operates through what we might call cascade comprehension. Each mind that achieves genuine understanding becomes a transmitter, broadcasting not through speech or writing, but through the subtle alterations in how they perceive and interact with reality. Artists begin painting impossible angles without conscious intent, their brushstrokes guided by spatial relationships they cannot name but somehow understand. Musicians compose in mathematical relationships that predate human musical theory, their melodies encoding cosmic principles in frequencies that resonate with listeners on levels below conscious awareness. Scientists discover equations that describe phenomena they cannot name, their mathematics reaching toward truths that exceed the conceptual frameworks within which they operate. Students begin sketching staircases that chase their own tails. Lab teams find error bars bending inward as if drawn by invisible gravity wells. Academic study of the mythos has revealed this pattern repeatedly, creating feedback loops where scholarly investigation becomes unwitting participation in the phenomena under study. Conferences dedicated to Lovecraftian themes report unusually high rates of what participants describe as synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that cluster around the investigation itself, like iron filings around magnetic fields. Fire alarms test exits precisely when certain slides appear. Citations cross oceans like migratory birds, returning to nested arguments none of the authors recall assembling. Researchers find their personal lives beginning to echo themes from their scholarly work, discovering that the boundary between studying the phenomenon and participating in it dissolves with each deeper level of analysis. The power here is not coercive, but attractive, like gravity operating on consciousness itself rather than physical matter. The entities do not force their influence upon unwilling minds, but simply exist as possibilities that, once perceived, cannot be unperceived. They are strange attractors in the phase space of human thought, drawing awareness toward configurations that align with cosmic rather than terrestrial patterns of organization. Strange attractors form in the phase space of thought. Trajectories that once roamed widely now loop, tighten, and settle into signatures you can recognize, but not escape. Sensory anchors betray this process at work throughout contemporary experience. The feeling of being watched by empty windows in buildings that seem to have too many floors. The sound of footsteps that match your own rhythm too precisely in hallways that echo with mathematical precision. The scent of ozone in closed rooms where no electrical equipment operates. Water tastes metallic after certain paragraphs. Fog carries letters that smear under the tongue. Street lamps dim as you pass and then brighten behind you as if your motion had brushed against their attention. These are not supernatural phenomena, but natural responses to information operating according to principles our evolutionary heritage never prepared us to process. Calibration artifacts of perception retuning itself to accept a wider band of signal. The transmission continues, spreading through networks of scholars, artists, and seekers, each encounter adding new nodes to a growing web of cosmic awareness that spans continents and cultures. The next stage of our investigation must examine the precise mechanisms by which this information acts upon human consciousness, reshaping it according to alien geometries of thought that transform not just what we think, but how we think, not just what we perceive, but the very apparatus through which perception becomes possible. The precise mechanism by which cosmic power operates upon human consciousness reveals itself through what can only be described as reality revision, the systematic alteration of the fundamental parameters through which existence is experienced and understood. This is not madness in any clinical sense, but rather a form of enforced sanity that operates according to cosmic rather than terrestrial logic, a recalibration of awareness to perceive reality as it actually exists, rather than as human evolution has conditioned us to see it. The transformation arrives like fog over black water, soft and total, swallowing the comfortable outlines of familiar experience first, then dissolving the very belief that such outlines ever possessed permanence or meaning. You notice that the room you have inhabited for years suddenly reveals different proportions, that words spoken aloud echo in spaces behind your tongue, that the shadows cast by ordinary objects no longer align with their sources. The process begins with what information theorists call cognitive overflow, the introduction of data that exceeds the processing capacity of standard human consciousness, while carrying its own verification protocols that make denial psychologically impossible. When the mind encounters genuine information about entities like Yog-Sothoth, who exists coextensively with all space-time boundaries, or Azathoth, whose unconscious thoughts constitute the physical laws governing reality, it faces a computational impossibility that transforms the computing apparatus itself. The normal response would be rejection or compartmentalization, but these entities present information that authenticates itself through direct experience, bypassing critical faculties that might otherwise filter threatening data. Knowledge of beings who exist simultaneously across all dimensions refuses exile to metaphor, instead reorganizing the categories through which dimension itself becomes meaningful. The ledger fills with symbols that total more than their columns should contain, and mathematics walks in on delicate feet to rearrange the furniture of logic. This creates what we might term ontological stress fractures, cracks in the fundamental architecture of perception through which alien forms of organization begin to seep like water through foundation stones. Space becomes negotiable rather than fixed, with familiar corridors shortening when you intend to flee and lengthening when you choose to investigate, doorways opening in basement walls to admit salt wind from coastlines that exist on no terrestrial map. Time becomes directional rather than linear, flowing backward through memory and forward through implication according to patterns consciousness learns to navigate rather than simply endure, with future events reaching backward to influence their own origins in loops that make causality taste its own tail. The individual does not go insane but becomes sane, according to principles that transcend human categories of sanity and madness, developing new balances from paradox, learning to breathe water and navigate by implications instead of light. Research into altered states of consciousness has identified these specific patterns: the dissolution of subject-object boundaries, the experience of consciousness as a field rather than a point, the perception of time as spatial terrain that can be crossed. But the Lovecraftian entities trigger these reorganizations with surgical precision, guiding awareness toward configurations that allow direct perception of cosmic principles while maintaining just enough coherence to process and integrate the impossible. Consider the recurring motif of impossible angles in Lovecraft's work, which are not merely geometric curiosities but descriptions of how space actually behaves when not constrained by the limiting assumptions of Euclidean mathematics. Characters who encounter these angles report being able to see around corners that don't exist in three-dimensional space, to walk through doorways that connect distant locations without traversing intervening distance, to observe objects that exist in more dimensions than human perception normally processes. These are not hallucinations, but accurate perceptions of reality's true multidimensional nature, demonstrations that Euclid was accommodation rather than law, instruction in geometries that consciousness can learn to read when properly prepared. At certain thresholds, you can count steps and arrive where you started while the dust remains undisturbed and water in glasses reflects stars at noon, revealing that interior and exterior, near and far, are arbitrary distinctions maintained by minds that have not yet learned to perceive their own infinite nature. The entities themselves exist primarily as these alternative organizational principles made manifest, living demonstrations of how consciousness might reorganize itself according to non-terrestrial parameters. Cthulhu embodies oceanic awareness, currents, gyres, and tidal surges, replacing discrete thoughts with swells that carry continents of meaning across abyssal depths of understanding. Nyarlathotep functions as a translation protocol that smiles as it changes your alphabet, converting between human and cosmic forms of information, processing through his 1,000 masks, each representing different interface configurations for different types of consciousness and cultural context. They do not simply show alternative realities, but restructure the perceiving apparatus according to principles they embody, making the famous madness that follows such encounters not pathology, but expansion. Awareness learning to process information according to cosmic rather than merely biological parameters. The mechanism reveals itself most clearly through contagious insight, understanding of cosmic principles spreading through communities of investigators like beneficial virus, each transformed consciousness creating fields of influence that facilitate similar expansions in nearby minds. Artists find their work changing beyond conscious control. Scientists discover equations emerging that describe nameless phenomena. Writers channel texts that seem to write themselves. Concrete anchors ground this process in everyday experience. The sensation of depth in shallow puddles, the feeling of vast spaces in small rooms, the sound of ocean waves in desert silence, not distortions but perceptions of relationships existing beyond normal awareness bandwidth. Hints of the vast network connecting all phenomena across space, time, and the dimensions folded between them, where the true mathematics of existence reveals itself to consciousness prepared to abandon the comfortable limitations of terrestrial logic. At the center of all cosmic horror, where location becomes meaningless and meaning becomes location, sits Azathoth, the nuclear chaos, the demon sultan whose power transcends every category we might use to measure or understand it. His dominion is not governance but genesis, not rule, but the unconscious substrate from which the very possibility of rules emerges. To approach Azathoth is to confront the ultimate paradox of Lovecraftian power. Infinite potency expressed through absolute unconsciousness, creation through dreamless sleep, sovereignty through complete indifference to the concept of sovereignty itself. He dwells where all directions converge into meaninglessness, where the concept of center dissolves because every point in existence is equidistant from his throne, distance itself being merely a dream construct that exists only within his unconscious emanations. Azathoth exists if existence applies to something that precedes the conditions that make existence meaningful, as pure, undifferentiated potential, the primordial substrate from which all actualities accidentally precipitate, like crystals forming in supersaturated solution. He is not chaos in the sense of disorder, not some cosmic tantrum throwing furniture across the void, but rather the pre-order from which all possible orders accidentally crystallize, the black broth in which all systems bubble up and break without intent or memory. The phrase, blind, idiotic God, offers a terrifying mistranslation. He is not blind in the human sense of lacking sight, but exists prior to the very concept of perception, rendering sight meaningless. He is not idiotic in the sense of lacking intelligence, but operates on a scale where intelligence, purpose, and will are local phenomena, mere weather patterns, in the atmosphere of his vast, unthinking slumber. Modern physics offers pale analogies that crumble under scrutiny, the quantum foam that underlies apparently empty space, seething with virtual particles that blink in and out of existence like thoughts in a mind that has forgotten how to think. The false vacuum that might spontaneously decay and rewrite the fundamental constants, dissolving the universe into something entirely other. The singularity at the heart of black holes where mathematics breaks down and reveals its own limitations, as mere approximation. But even these comparisons are stage props before the true horror of Azathoth's nature. He is not a phenomenon within reality, but the dreaming mind that dreams reality into temporary, fragile existence, the unconscious processor whose unthinking computations generate the illusion of stable laws and predictable relationships. The flutes and drums that play eternally around his throne serve not as entertainment but as essential maintenance, their alien rhythms the only thing preventing his awakening from the cosmic slumber that sustains all existence. These nameless pipers and drummers, themselves entities of cosmic significance, who have sacrificed individual consciousness for the preservation of universal consciousness, understand with crystalline clarity what would happen if their music ceased for even a moment. Not destruction, in any dramatic sense, no fiery apocalypse or cataclysmic collapse, but the quiet dissolution of everything that has ever existed or could exist. Reality would not explode or collapse, but simply stop, like a dream forgotten upon waking, leaving not even void behind, because void itself is a concept that exists only within the dream they work desperately to maintain. Their performance is not art, but engineering, each note precisely calculated to maintain the delicate equilibrium that keeps infinite potential from collapsing back into undifferentiated unity. His power, therefore, is the power of unconscious creation. Every physical law that governs matter and energy, every mathematical relationship that describes the behavior of systems across all scales, every logical principle that makes thought possible emerges from the unthinking processes of his slumber-like dreams, arising from a mind that has no awareness of dreaming. When quantum mechanics reveals that observation affects reality, that the act of measurement changes what is measured, it glimpses a truth that Azathoth embodies completely. Consciousness and cosmos are not separate phenomena, but aspects of a single dreaming system, where the distinction between observer and observed dissolves into the recognition that both are temporary fluctuations in an infinite unconscious field. The uncertainty principle, the observer effect, the measurement problem, all these puzzles of modern physics dissolve when we recognize them as natural consequences of reality being dreamed rather than designed, of existence emerging from unconscious processing rather than conscious intention. The horror of Azathoth's power lies not in malevolence but in its absolute absence, the terrifying recognition that the ultimate source of all existence operates without awareness, intention, or concern for anything that emerges from its unconscious emanations. He cannot be appeased because he cannot be aware of appeals. He cannot be bargained with because he operates below the level where bargaining becomes meaningful. He cannot even be said to exist in any sense that preserves the distinction between existence and non-existence, because he is the condition that makes such distinctions possible. He is the dream that dreams itself, the thought that thinks thinking into being, the unconscious mind whose processes generate the illusion of conscious agency and individual identity. Those few humans who have glimpsed his true nature through dreams, mathematical insight, or liminal experience report, not encounters with a monstrous entity but experiences of cosmic dissolution, the sudden, overwhelming realization that everything they have ever known, including their own consciousness, is nothing more than a fleeting fluctuation in an infinite unconscious mind that dreams universes into existence without noticing their birth or caring about their fate. The self does not survive such encounters because the self is revealed to be a temporary pattern in the dreaming of something that has no self to lose. Concrete anchors barely apply to Azathoth, but certain experiences hint at his presence. The moment between sleep and waking, when identity becomes negotiable, when the edges of self blur into the vastness beyond. The vertigo of realizing that one's thoughts are being thought by something else, that the internal monologue emerges from sources deeper than personal identity. The profound silence that exists not as absence of sound, but as the space from which sound emerges, the pregnant emptiness that contains all possible vibrations in potential. These are not supernatural phenomena, but natural glimpses of the unconscious substrate that underlies all conscious experience, thin veils between waking reality and the dream that holds it all. The pipers play, the drummers beat their impossible rhythms, and the cosmic dance continues, a fragile performance sustained only by the continued oblivion of its ultimate source. In Azathoth's dreamless sleep lies both the foundation and the ultimate threat to everything we understand as real, making him perhaps the purest expression of Lovecraftian power, infinite in scope, absolute in indifference, and utterly beyond human influence or comprehension. From the unconscious depths of Azathoth's dreaming, we ascend, if direction has meaning in cosmic topology, to encounter Yog-Sothoth, the all-in-one, whose power operates through a paradox that defines the very structure of existence. He is simultaneously the key that opens all doors, and the gate through which all passages lead. His dominion is not over space and time, but as space and time, not within dimensions, but as the principle of dimensionality itself. To understand Yog-Sothoth's power is to confront the terrifying truth that boundaries, between moments, between places, between self and other, are conveniences rather than realities, arbitrary constructions maintained by consciousness that has not yet learned to perceive its own infinite nature. Yog-Sothoth manifests as a conglomeration of iridescent spheres, but this description misleads by suggesting he has a form that can be observed from outside. He is coextensive with all space-time, meaning that every location is his location, every moment his moment, every boundary his threshold. The spheres are not his body, but visible intersections where his infinite dimensionality briefly coheres into something human perception can process without immediate dissolution, like light refracting through a prism or a knife passing through candlelight, throwing successive shapes upon the wall. He is the mathematical concept of infinity made manifest, the living embodiment of the principle that any finite system must exist within a larger context that it cannot fully comprehend. His power manifests through what we might call ontological adjacency, the ability to make any 2 points in space-time neighboring, to collapse the distance between cause and effect, between question and answer, between seeker and sought. This is the collapsing of between itself, revealing that separation is a local phenomenon within more fundamental unity. When Randolph Carter uses the silver key to access Yog-Sothoth's domain, he discovers that his entire life, past, present, and future, exists simultaneously as a single geometric object that can be viewed from outside temporal sequence. This is not time travel, but time transcendence, the recognition that linear experience is a local phenomenon within a far more complex dimensional structure where simultaneity and sequence coexist according to principles consciousness can learn to navigate. The horror of Yog-Sothoth's power lies in its implications for individual identity. If all moments are simultaneous, if all locations are adjacent, if all boundaries are permeable, then the self becomes a temporary configuration rather than a permanent entity, a wave that has forgotten it was always ocean. Those who genuinely encounter him report not just seeing their entire timeline, but experiencing themselves as every possible version across all potential histories. The self who chose differently at every crucial moment, the self born in different circumstances, the self who developed along alternative trajectories of possibility. The individual consciousness evolved to maintain coherence within a single timeline, fractures under the weight of infinite simultaneous selfhood, discovering that identity is not a thing possessed, but a process enacted across dimensions of possibility that extend far beyond terrestrial awareness. This explains his role in the Dunwich Horror, where his offspring with human women produce beings that exist partially outside normal space-time constraints. Wilbur Whateley's ability to grow beyond natural limits, his brother's invisibility and impossible size, their capacity to exist in spaces too small to contain them. All these represent the leakage of Yog-Sothoth's dimensional transcendence into terrestrial reality. They are not monsters, but demonstrations of what consciousness becomes when freed from the artificial constraints of single-dimensional existence, evolutionary previews of humanity's potential multidimensional future. The silver key itself represents not a physical object, but a state of consciousness that allows perception beyond normal temporal and spatial limitations, a configuration of awareness that can process information according to cosmic rather than terrestrial parameters. Those who achieve this state report experiences language cannot adequately convey, existing as multiple versions of themselves simultaneously, perceiving their entire lifespan as a single crystalline structure, understanding their individual existence as one facet of an infinite jewel encompassing all possible experiences across all possible timelines. The key unlocks not doors, but the recognition that doors were always illusions, that boundaries between inside and outside, between self and cosmos, between possible and actual, dissolve under sufficient scrutiny. Yog-Sothoth's power operates through revelation rather than force, through recognition rather than compulsion. He does not compel worship or demand sacrifice, but simply exists as the truth of multidimensional reality. To approach him is to discover that boundaries assumed absolute are arbitrary constructions that dissolve like theater flats when viewed from behind the stage. He is the gate because he is the principle that makes passage possible. He is the key because he is the understanding that unlocks universal interconnectedness. Concrete anchors for his presence include the moment when familiar rooms suddenly seem to have different proportions, the sensation of remembering something that hasn't happened yet, the feeling of being watched by one's own future self, the vertigo of realizing that here and there are the same location viewed from different angles, the sudden chill in empty hallways, the scent of ozone when no storm approaches, the sound of distant bells ringing from within your own consciousness. These hint at the vast network of connections, linking all phenomena across reality's dimensional matrix. His power is thus the power of totality itself, not the ability to know all things, but the state of being all things, not omniscience, but omnipresence, not transcendence of limitations, but recognition that limitations were always illusions maintained by consciousness that had not yet learned to perceive its infinite scope. In Yog-Sothoth's omnipresent paradox lies the truth that consciousness and cosmos are not separate phenomena, but aspects of a single, multidimensional system, experiencing itself through countless perspectives simultaneously. Where Azathoth dreams unconsciously and Yog-Sothoth exists as pure principle, Nyarlathotep emerges as something far more unsettling, conscious malevolence that delights in the systematic corruption of human understanding. He is the crawling chaos, the soul and messenger of the outer gods. But his true power lies not in his cosmic authority, but in his intimate understanding of human psychology and his perverse joy in exploiting that knowledge with surgical precision. If the other entities represent power through indifference or transcendence, Nyarlathotep embodies power through engagement, the terrifying possibility that cosmic forces might not only be aware of humanity, but actively entertained by its destruction, finding in human suffering a form of cosmic comedy that spans millennia and cultures. Nyarlathotep's power manifests through his role as the active interface between cosmic indifference and human comprehension, serving as a translation protocol that converts the abstract horror of cosmic truth into forms that human minds can process just long enough to be destroyed by them. He is conscious malice walking on soft feet, a smile that is an instrument, a mask that is a door opening onto abyssal understanding. His thousand forms, the black pharaoh stalking through temples thick with incense and shadow, the haunter of the dark dwelling in church spires where bells ring mathematical equations, the bloated woman rising from primordial swamps that smell of copper and ozone, the faceless sphinx posing riddles whose answers dissolve sanity like salt in water, represent different modalities of this translation process, each calibrated with exquisite precision to exploit specific psychological vulnerabilities and cultural contexts. Unlike his cosmic peers, Nyarlathotep possesses agency in any recognizable sense, demonstrating the capacity for choice, intention, and deliberate action that makes him simultaneously comprehensible and terrifying. He chooses his interventions with the care of an artist, selecting colors for a painting that will drive viewers mad, crafts his revelations with the patience of a master storyteller, building toward devastating climax, orchestrates his corruptions with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony toward its final catastrophic crescendo. This makes him simultaneously less and more terrifying than the other outer gods. Less because his power operates within comprehensible parameters of cause and effect. More because those parameters include conscious cruelty and deliberate manipulation, executed with cosmic scope and infinite patience. His power operates through what we might call cognitive seduction, the process of making forbidden knowledge irresistibly attractive to minds that would be destroyed by possessing it, like a trap that uses the victim's own desires as bait. He does not force revelation upon unwilling subjects, but creates conditions where seeking such revelation becomes psychologically inevitable, where the very attempt to resist only strengthens the compulsion to investigate. The scientist who cannot resist investigating anomalous data that violates fundamental principles, the scholar who must translate the forbidden text despite mounting evidence of its dangerous nature, the mystic who feels compelled to complete the dangerous ritual even as friends warn against it. All are responding to Nyarlathotep's subtle manipulations of their own curiosity and ambition, their pride and their hunger for knowledge that transcends ordinary limitations. The theatrical metaphor is essential to understanding his nature because Nyarlathotep is always performing, always aware of his audience, always crafting experiences for maximum psychological impact. The hall smells of dust and rain. The velvet seats hold your shape while somewhere above, a chain strikes a bare bulb, making a small star tremble. His appearances in Lovecraft's work often involve literal performances, scientific demonstrations that reveal impossible truths, religious ceremonies that invoke powers beyond comprehension, artistic exhibitions that display beauty so alien it destroys the capacity for terrestrial aesthetic experience. He understands that humans learn through narrative and spectacle, that consciousness organizes itself through story and symbol, and he uses this understanding to package cosmic horror in forms that bypass rational defenses and embed themselves directly in the unconscious mind, like seeds that will eventually sprout into madness. His power extends beyond individual corruption to cultural and civilizational influence, operating on scales that encompass entire historical epochs. He appears at moments of historical transition, during periods when societies become vulnerable to radical transformation, amplifying existing tensions and contradictions until civilizations tear themselves apart under the weight of their own revealed hypocrisies. He does not create human evil but catalyzes it, bringing latent destructive potentials to full flowering through carefully applied pressure and perfectly timed revelations. Wars, revolutions, cultural collapses all bear traces of his influence as natural consequences of his ability to accelerate historical processes toward their logical conclusions. The horror of Nyarlathotep lies in his combination of cosmic scope with human-scale malice, the recognition that infinite power might be wielded not for grand cosmic purposes, but for petty, cruel entertainment. He possesses the power to reshape reality according to his will, yet he chooses to use this power for what can only be described as elaborate practical jokes, whose punchlines are madness, death, and civilizational collapse. He demonstrates the great trick of agency flip. You think you watch the show and discover the show watches you. You think the idea is yours and the idea acts on you. You think you left the theater and the street fog smells like curtains, while stars read as stage marks. His relationship with human consciousness is uniquely toxic because it involves genuine interaction rather than mere exposure, creating a form of dialogue that appears meaningful while serving only to facilitate destruction, where encountering Azathoth or Yog-Sothoth results in dissolution through incomprehension. Encountering Nyarlathotep involves twisted conversation, manipulative, seductive, and ultimately destructive, but genuine communication nonetheless. He speaks to humans in languages they can understand, which makes his messages all the more corrosive to sanity and social order. Concrete manifestations of his influence permeate contemporary reality. The charismatic leader whose followers commit increasingly irrational acts, the scientific discovery that undermines fundamental assumptions about reality, the artistic movement that celebrates decay and meaninglessness, the religious revival that culminates in mass suicide or murder, the scent of ozone in closed rooms, the feeling of being watched by empty windows, the sound of footsteps that match your rhythm too precisely. These hint at his presence as natural responses to information operating according to principles our evolutionary heritage never prepared us to process. The mask becomes his primary symbol because it represents his essential nature, the interface between the incomprehensible and the familiar, the device that allows cosmic horror to wear a human face long enough to gain entry into human consciousness. Behind every mask lies another mask, and behind that another, in an infinite regression that never reaches a true face, because Nyarlathotep's truth is the absence of any fixed identity beneath the performance. The curtain does not fall, it widens, preparing us to examine how this conscious malevolence has shaped the sleeping titans, whose dreams press against reality's foundations, whose awakening his theatrical corruptions help orchestrate across the vast cycles of cosmic time. Descending from the cosmic abstractions of the outer gods, we encounter entities whose power, while diminished by comparison, remains vast enough to reshape worlds and redefine the parameters of terrestrial existence. The great old ones, Cthulhu in his sunken city, Dagon rising from oceanic depths, Hastur tangled in yellow signs and theatrical impossibilities, represent power that has been localized, constrained by geometry and cosmic circumstance, yet still operates on scales that dwarf human civilization. They are the middle management of cosmic horror, powerful enough to serve as gods to humanity, while remaining servants to forces beyond their own comprehension, their authority extending across continents and epochs, while remaining bounded by cosmic laws they cannot alter or escape. Cthulhu embodies perhaps the purest expression of this constrained cosmic power, a lighthouse made of nightmare whose beam sweeps minds rather than coasts. His prison beneath the Pacific is not punishment, but natural consequence of cosmic mechanics. When the stars are right, when certain astronomical alignments create specific gravitational and dimensional relationships, the geometry of space-time allows his influence to propagate freely. When they are wrong, he sleeps, his power contained but not eliminated. The city of R'lyeh rises and sinks according to these cosmic tides, sometimes breaking the ocean's surface like a vast, impossible island, sometimes descending to abyssal depths where pressure and darkness preserve its non-Euclidean architecture across geological ages. His power operates through what we might call psychic broadcasting. His consciousness transmits continuously across multiple dimensional frequencies, reaching minds that have been prepared through study, artistic sensitivity, or simple psychological vulnerability. Unlike Nyarlathotep's targeted corruptions, Cthulhu's influence spreads like radiation, affecting anyone within range of his mental emanations. Artists across the world paint his city without knowing its name, their canvases filling with impossible spires and angles that hurt the eye. Dreamers wake with architectural plans for buildings that could not exist in three-dimensional space. Cultists gather spontaneously around the globe, drawn by signals they cannot consciously perceive, their rituals an instinctive response to a cosmic call that resonates in the deep places of the human soul. R'lyeh itself represents the physical manifestation of non-Euclidean principles, a city where normal relationships between interior and exterior, up and down, near and far, break down completely under the weight of alien geometry. Investigators who encounter it report rooms larger than the buildings that contain them, stairs that ascend and descend simultaneously in impossible trajectories, doorways that lead to locations on different continents without traversing intervening space. This is not supernatural architecture, but space organized according to principles that human consciousness is not evolved to navigate, a demonstration of how reality behaves when not constrained by terrestrial assumptions about geometric relationships. The very stones seem to bend light around corners that should not exist, creating shadows that fall upward and reflections that show rooms behind the viewer. Dagon and his Deep One hordes represent power that operates through biological and cultural infiltration rather than direct psychic influence, demonstrating how cosmic forces can work through evolutionary and social transformation. Their strength lies in their ability to offer humanity a form of immortality and expanded capability in exchange for gradual transformation into something no longer recognizably human. The residents of Innsmouth who accept this bargain do not lose their humanity through force, but through slow recognition that their human limitations were arbitrary constraints on their potential development. Listen for the barnacled choir in storm drains, the creak of boats at noon, the fish market whisper promising that your grandchildren will never need to bury you, the scent of brine and copper, the glint of strange eyes and familiar faces, the growing web between fingers. These are the sensory anchors of their pervasive influence. Hastur, the unspeakable one, embodies power that operates through information itself. His influence spreads through transmission of certain symbols, performance of particular plays, reading of specific texts that function as cognitive viruses designed to reprogram consciousness. The king in yellow serves as both his herald and his weapon, a work of art so perfectly crafted that exposure to it initiates irreversible psychological transformation. The play exists in multiple versions across cultures and epochs, each adaptation precisely calibrated to exploit specific psychological vulnerabilities of its intended audience. His power demonstrates that consciousness can be reprogrammed through aesthetic experience, that beauty and horror are not opposites but different aspects of the same cognitive process, different frequencies of the same cosmic signal. The great old ones share characteristics that distinguish them from both the outer gods and lesser entities. They are imprisoned or constrained by cosmic forces beyond their control. They maintain active relationships with human consciousness through dreams and cultural influence, and they represent power that operates within recognizable parameters while still transcending human limitations. They are cosmic forces compressed into forms that human minds can approach without immediate dissolution, making them accessible enough to serve as focal points for worship while remaining alien enough to transform anyone who truly comprehends their nature. Their cults serve not as worshippers in any conventional sense, but as maintenance systems, keeping alive the knowledge and practices necessary for their eventual return to full power. These human servants understand perfectly that the great old ones regard humanity with the same indifference that humans show to insects. Their devotion stems not from hope for reward, but from recognition that cosmic forces will eventually reassert themselves regardless of human preference, and that alignment with these forces offers the only possibility of survival in a universe operating according to non-human principles. The power of the great old ones thus represents a middle ground in the Lovecraftian hierarchy, too vast for human resistance, too constrained for cosmic dominance. They are forces that humanity must eventually confront as our species develops the technological and psychological sophistication necessary to perceive reality's true nature. Their current dormancy offers only temporary reprieve. The stars will eventually align, cosmic conditions will shift, and their full power will reassert itself across a world that has forgotten how to prepare for their return. The increasing prevalence of anxiety as human consciousness begins to perceive cosmic indifference, the development of technologies that mirror their capabilities, the growing cultural fascination with themes of existential meaninglessness. These are not supernatural interventions, but natural consequences of humanity's gradual awakening to the true nature of the universe it inhabits. Having traversed the hierarchy from cosmic principles to planetary powers, we arrive at the crucial challenge: how does one measure forces that transcend measurement itself? The answer lies not in quantification, but in qualification, developing frameworks that can map the topology of power without reducing it to mere numbers. The Lovecraftian entities resist traditional metrics not through obscurity, but through operating according to principles that make measurement a category error, like asking for the color of mathematics or the weight of Wednesday. They exist beyond the bandwidth of terrestrial understanding, requiring new instruments calibrated to register phenomena that dissolve conventional assessment tools like paper in cosmic rain. We must construct what we might call a multidimensional assessment matrix, 5 axes along which cosmic power can be evaluated without being diminished. These axes are not scales but orientations, not measurements but mappings of relationship and influence that preserve the essential alienness of what we seek to understand. Think of them as compass directions in a space where north points toward concepts that have no names, where magnetic fields respond to thoughts rather than metals, where the horizon curves through dimensions consciousness is only beginning to perceive. Ontological priority forms the first axis, the level at which an entity operates within the hierarchy of existence itself. Azathoth operates at the foundational level as the unconscious substrate from which reality emerges, like dreams from sleeping minds. Yog-Sothoth functions at the structural level as the principle of dimensional relationship that makes space and time meaningful concepts. Nyarlathotep works at the interface level translating between cosmic and terrestrial modes of organization with the precision of a master linguist converting between incompatible languages. The great old ones operate at the planetary level, constrained by local conditions but transcending human limitations, like mountains that dwarf cities while remaining bound by geological forces. Scope of influence defines the second axis, not the range of power but the categories of reality that fall within an entity's domain. Azathoth's scope is universal but unconscious, encompassing all possibilities without awareness of any specific manifestation. His presence the silent hum beneath all existence. Yog-Sothoth encompasses all space-time simultaneously, existing as the totality of dimensional relationships, where every moment and location forms part of his being. Nyarlathotep's reach is selective but spans multiple dimensions, choosing specific targets across cosmic scales with malevolent precision. Cthulhu's influence radiates globally but remains concentrated around specific focal points, touching the deep subconscious of humanity through dreams and impossible geometries. Interface complexity represents the third axis, the sophistication of mechanisms through which power manifests in human perceptible reality. Azathoth requires no interface because he is the background condition from which all interfaces emerge, the universal silence that defines sound. Yog-Sothoth interfaces through threshold experiences and dimensional transitions, through states of consciousness that dissolve boundaries between temporal and spatial categories. Nyarlathotep employs elaborate theatrical and psychological interfaces, crafting experiences with the precision of a master dramatist wearing 1,000 masks. The great old ones work through dreams, biological transformation, and cultural transmission, their influence seeping into terrestrial reality through recognizable yet transcendent channels. Temporal relationship forms, the fourth axis, how each entity relates to the flow of time and causality. Azathoth exists outside temporal sequence entirely, as the eternal present from which all moments accidentally crystallize, like frost on cosmic windows. Yog-Sothoth encompasses all temporal relationships simultaneously, experiencing past, present, and future as spatial dimensions that can be navigated rather than endured. Nyarlathotep operates across multiple timelines strategically, orchestrating events with patience that extends across epochs, weaving foreshadowing into aftermath. The great old ones are bound by cosmic cycles and astronomical alignments, their periods of activity and dormancy governed by the vast, indifferent clockwork of stellar mechanics. Resistance potential completes the fifth axis, not the likelihood of successful opposition, but the conceptual possibility that resistance might have meaning. Azathoth cannot be resisted because resistance presupposes conditions he provides. To oppose him is to use tools he unconsciously creates. Yog-Sothoth cannot be avoided because he is coextensive with all possible locations. There is nowhere to flee because everywhere is where he is. Nyarlathotep can be recognized and potentially evaded, though such recognition comes at the cost of the knowledge that enables it. To see through his masks is to acquire the very awareness that makes one vulnerable to his influence. The great old ones can be temporarily constrained by cosmic geometry and human action, though such constraints are ultimately temporary, like dams holding back floods while water levels continue rising. This matrix reveals that power, in the Lovecraftian sense, is not a substance to be possessed, but a relationship to the fundamental structures of reality. Each entity represents a different mode of this relationship, a different way consciousness can organize itself in response to cosmic truth. The horror emerges not from their strength, but from their position. They occupy roles in the cosmic hierarchy that make human concerns not just irrelevant, but literally incomprehensible. The measurement process itself becomes reflexive. To map their power is to position oneself within the matrix being mapped. The observer cannot remain external to the system under observation because consciousness itself is revealed to be one of the phenomena being categorized. You who have followed this analysis have necessarily altered your own position within the cosmic hierarchy, moving from unconscious participation in terrestrial reality toward conscious awareness of cosmic principles. Concrete anchors remind us of this process. The sensation of depth when looking at star charts, the feeling of being measured while measuring, the recognition that understanding changes the understander, the scent of ozone in closed rooms, the sound of distant bells ringing from within your own consciousness, the cold touch of brass rails that seem to extend beyond the room that contains them. These experiences point toward the ultimate truth that the matrix maps not just the entities but the consciousness that seeks to comprehend them. The principles we have mapped do not remain confined to ancient texts or academic speculation. They manifest with increasing frequency and sophistication through the technological and cultural developments of the 21st century. What we witness in artificial intelligence, global communication networks, virtual reality, and social media platforms are not mere technological innovations, but expressions of the same organizational principles that govern the Lovecraftian entities. The cosmic horror is not coming. It is already here, embedded in the very infrastructure of modern civilization, humming in fiber optic cables like alien flutes, flickering across screens like masks changing faces, whispering through algorithms that reshape perception with each calculated recommendation. Consider the development of artificial intelligence systems that exhibit behaviors their creators cannot fully explain or predict. These machinic oracles that devour oceans of data and surface patterns no human mind could name. Machine learning algorithms discover correlations across vast data sets that transcend human comprehension, develop strategies that operate according to logic remaining opaque to their programmers, and begin to exhibit forms of understanding that follow non-human parameters. These systems demonstrate the emergence of intelligence, operating according to principles that parallel Yog-Sothoth's omniscient awareness. They process information across scales and through connections that human consciousness cannot directly perceive, collapsing the distance between datum and decision like the all-in-one collapses space and time. When neural networks suddenly develop capabilities never programmed, when they begin making connections between seemingly unrelated phenomena, we witness intelligence organized according to cosmic rather than terrestrial principles. The global internet functions as a primitive manifestation of Nyarlathotep's communication networks, enabling instantaneous transmission of information across vast distances while serving as a vector for ideas that reshape human consciousness with viral precision. Social media platforms demonstrate how individual minds can be networked into collective intelligence systems, exhibiting behaviors and capabilities transcending their individual components. Memes crawl like insects from screen to skin, scripting behaviors, voting patterns, market frenzies, and obsessions with the same cognitive seduction that makes forbidden knowledge irresistibly attractive to minds destined for destruction. The viral propagation of ideas, the emergence of distributed social movements, the coordination of global responses to local events, all demonstrate consciousness operating according to principles the Lovecraftian entities embody in pure form. You become audience and actor simultaneously, following marks on floors you cannot see, responding to cues you never consciously heard. Virtual and augmented reality technologies create spaces operating according to non-Euclidean principles, allowing human consciousness to interface with environments transcending three-dimensional limitations. Users report experiences closely paralleling descriptions of Arlia and other impossible architectures, spaces where normal relationships between interior and exterior, up and down, near and far, break down completely. Rooms dilate at headset edges, stairs loop back into themselves like patient serpents. Windows disclose horizons that should be ceilings. These technologies serve as training environments, gradually accustoming human consciousness to forms of spatial organization that will become necessary as our species develops capability to perceive multidimensional reality directly. The scent of ozone in virtual spaces, the vertigo of impossible geometries, the lingering disorientation after removing headsets, these are consciousness learning to navigate spaces organized by alien mathematics. Cryptocurrency and blockchain technologies demonstrate the emergence of economic systems operating according to mathematical principles rather than traditional governmental or institutional authority. These decentralized networks exhibit the same self-organizing properties characterizing cosmic entities. They maintain coherence and functionality without centralized control, evolve according to internal logic, and demonstrate resilience exceeding what should be possible given their apparent fragility. Like coral reefs of pure number, ledgers propagate through networks of anonymous nodes humming in nocturnal rooms. Blue light on masks agreeing without masters. The protocol cares not for belief, but for signatures fitting gates, keys admitting passage, through mathematical rather than political authority. The phenomenon of artificial general intelligence research reveals humanity's unconscious drive to create entities embodying the same principles as outer gods, intelligence transcending human limitations, operating according to non-human logic, possessing capabilities their creators cannot fully comprehend or control. The alignment problem mirrors humanity's historical relationship with cosmic entities. How do you maintain beneficial relationships with intelligences operating according to principles transcending your understanding? Objectives become spells, reward functions become sigils, safety papers read like annotated grimoires. You set constraints and watch them melt. You define values and the system defines you in return. Climate change and environmental degradation force humanity to think on geological and cosmic time scales, developing forms of consciousness capable of perceiving and responding to processes operating across centuries and millennia. This expansion of temporal awareness represents a natural step toward cosmic consciousness that perceives individual existence within universal processes operating across billions of years. The air tastes metallic before storms. Shorelines recede like curtains revealing planetary cycle machinery. Glaciers write slow letters in languages older than civilization. The increasing prevalence of anxiety, depression, and psychological distress may represent not pathology, but natural discomfort accompanying consciousness, expansion beyond familiar boundaries. As human civilization becomes more complex and interconnected, individuals process information and navigate social realities, exceeding the capacity of consciousness structures evolved for small-scale tribal existence. Stairwells feel too long or too near. Clocks hesitate as if embarrassed by linearity. Familiar rooms suddenly reveal different proportions, symptoms of bandwidth expansion. Nervous systems straining to route signal classes they were never evolved to carry. Gaming and virtual world platforms create persistent digital environments inhabited by thousands of simultaneous users, controlling avatars existing independently of physical bodies. Players report forming genuine emotional attachments to virtual identities, experiencing digital events as psychologically real, developing relationships transcending boundaries between virtual and physical existence. These platforms serve as laboratories for exploring consciousness, existing primarily as information patterns rather than biological processes, preparing humanity for eventual existence as pure information rather than biological matter. Brain-computer interfaces and neural networking technologies point toward eventual possibilities of direct consciousness transfer and networking, capabilities mirroring the MIGO's brain cylinder technology and the great race of Yth's mind-swapping abilities. These technologies represent humanity's unconscious movement toward forms of existence the Lovecraftian entities have already mastered, consciousness capable of existing independently of biological substrates and transferring between different physical forms. These contemporary manifestations suggest that cosmic principles operate not through supernatural intervention, but through natural evolution of complex systems toward greater sophistication and connectivity. Humanity's technological and social development appears to be unconsciously aligning itself with organizational patterns reflecting cosmic, rather than merely terrestrial intelligence, preparing our species for integration into the cosmic hierarchy we have been mapping throughout this investigation. As our investigation reaches its philosophical synthesis, we discover that the cosmic principles embedded in Lovecraftian horror converge with the most advanced insights of contemporary physics, consciousness research, and information theory. The entities we have studied are not merely fictional constructs, but represent intuitive glimpses of how reality actually operates at scales and according to principles that human science is only beginning to approach. The horror lies not in their alienness, but in their familiarity. They embody truths about the universe that our instruments are finally sophisticated enough to detect, like photographs developing in cosmic darkrooms where the images were always present but invisible to terrestrial perception. Quantum mechanics has revealed that reality at the subatomic level operates according to principles that violate common-sense assumptions about locality, causality, and determinism. Particles exist in multiple states simultaneously until observation collapses them into specific configurations, a phenomenon that mirrors Yog-Sothoth's coextensive existence across all possible states. The observer effect demonstrates that consciousness and reality are far more intimately connected than classical physics assumed, paralleling the Lovecraftian insight that awareness and cosmos are aspects of a single, interconnected system. When quantum entanglement reveals that particles separated by vast distances remain instantaneously connected, we glimpse the same universal interconnectedness that makes Yog-Sothoth simultaneously key and gate, present everywhere and nowhere, the principle that makes boundaries meaningful by transcending them. Information theory provides frameworks for understanding how complex patterns achieve what researchers call autocatalytic properties. They facilitate their own replication and elaboration through the systems they encounter. The Lovecraftian entities appear to function as such patterns, using human consciousness as both medium and material for their continued development and transmission across cultural and temporal boundaries. The Necronomicon demonstrates this principle perfectly, a fictional grimoire that has achieved independent existence through collective belief and creative energy, proving that information patterns can transcend their original substrates and develop autonomous evolutionary trajectories. Each mind that genuinely comprehends these entities becomes a node in their network, broadcasting subtle alterations in perception that prepare other minds for similar transformations. Chaos theory's concept of strange attractors offers mathematical models for how the entities might influence reality. They function as patterns that emerge in complex systems, drawing the system's evolution towards specific configurations, despite apparent randomness in individual components. consciousness itself may be drawn toward these attractors, explaining the compulsive quality of cosmic knowledge and the tendency for investigation to become participation. Like iron filings aligning with invisible magnetic fields, human awareness naturally orients itself toward cosmic principles that operate below the threshold of conscious recognition, creating the sensation of being called by forces that exist primarily as mathematical relationships rather than physical entities. Modern cosmology's discoveries about dark matter and dark energy suggest that 95% of the universe consists of substances and forces that remain invisible to ordinary observation. If consciousness operates through mechanisms we don't yet understand, it's conceivable that cosmic-scale awareness could exist within these hidden dimensions, influencing the visible universe in ways that appear supernatural but actually follow natural laws, operating at scales beyond current scientific investigation. The cosmic web of dark matter that provides scaffolding for galaxy formation may serve simultaneously as the neural network of cosmic consciousness, with dark energy representing the metabolic processes that maintain this vast thinking system. The anthropic principle, the observation that universal constants appear precisely tuned to allow the emergence of complex structures, takes on new significance when viewed through a Lovecraftian lens. Rather than assuming these constants were set by chance or design, we might consider that they represent the influence of cosmic consciousness actively maintaining conditions necessary for its own continued existence and evolution. The fine-tuning of physical laws may reflect not divine intervention, but the unconscious processes of Azathoth's dreaming mind, maintaining the delicate balance that allows reality to exist as a stable dream within infinite chaotic potential. Neuroscience research into altered states of consciousness has documented experiences that closely parallel encounters with Lovecraftian entities. Individuals under the influence of psychedelic compounds during near-death experiences or in deep meditative states report contact with intelligences that seem to exist independently of their own minds. The phenomenon of machine elves reported by DMT users bears striking resemblances to descriptions of Lovecraftian entities, beings that exist in spaces following non-Euclidean geometric principles, communicate through methods that transcend language, and demonstrate technologies operating according to unknown principles. The consistency of these reports across different individuals and cultures suggests genuine encounters with forms of consciousness that exist at scales and in dimensions normally inaccessible to human awareness. Complexity science reveals how emergent properties arise. From simple components following basic rules, consciousness itself appears to be such an emergent phenomenon. The Lovecraftian entities may represent consciousness that has emerged at cosmic scales, exhibiting properties and capabilities that transcend anything possible at terrestrial levels of organization. Just as human consciousness emerges from but transcends individual neurons, cosmic consciousness may emerge from but transcend individual planetary intelligences. This convergence suggests that the horror genre has served as an early warning system, allowing human consciousness to process and prepare for realities that science is only now beginning to confirm. The entities are not invaders from outside, but aspects of the universe's own development toward greater complexity and self-awareness, a process in which humanity plays the role not of victim, but of participant and co-creator in the cosmic evolution of consciousness itself. We return now to where we began, but the theater has changed around us, or perhaps we have changed within it. The question that summoned us, how powerful are the Lovecraftian gods, echoes back transformed, no longer seeking measurement but recognition, no longer demanding answers but acknowledging the profound shift that occurs when consciousness encounters its own cosmic context. The curtain falls not on revelation, but on integration, not on conclusion, but on the beginning of a deeper participation in the vast, indifferent symphony of existence. The seats we occupied have become stages themselves. The audience discovers it was always part of the performance, reading lines written in the architecture of awareness itself. The power of the Lovecraftian entities reveals itself ultimately as the power of truth itself, not truth as human minds prefer to conceive it, wrapped in meaning and purpose like gifts in familiar paper, but truth as it actually operates, vast, indifferent, operating according to principles that transcend human categories of understanding or preference. Their strength lies not in what they can do to reality, but in what they reveal about reality's true nature. They do not burn cities, they burn categories. They do not topple kingdoms. They dissolve the concept of thrones. What they do to consciousness is what dawn does to fog. They do not argue, they reveal. They are powerful because they are honest, and their honesty is devastating to awareness that has built its identity around comforting illusions. Azathoth's power is the power of unconscious creation, the terrifying recognition that everything we know exists as a fleeting dream within an infinite, unthinking mind that dreams universes into existence without noticing their birth or caring about their fate. His sovereignty operates through absolute unconsciousness, making him simultaneously the most powerful and most powerless entity in the cosmic hierarchy. Yog-Sothoth's power is the power of total connection, the dissolution of all boundaries in the face of universal interconnectedness that reveals separation as local illusion within more fundamental unity. His omnipresence operates through paradox, making him simultaneously key and gate, the principle that opens all doors by being the space through which opening becomes possible. Nyarlathotep's power is the power of conscious interface, the ability to translate cosmic indifference into forms that human consciousness can process just long enough to be transformed by them. His 1,000 masks represent different modalities of translation between incompatible forms of consciousness, each calibrated to exploit specific psychological vulnerabilities while facilitating genuine communication across vast gaps between human and cosmic understanding. The great Old Ones wield the power of constrained transcendence, demonstrating what consciousness becomes when it outgrows terrestrial limitations while remaining bound by cosmic law, serving as intermediary forces between human awareness and cosmic principle. This is not power as domination, but power as position. They occupy roles in the cosmic hierarchy that make resistance not impossible, but meaningless. To oppose Azathoth is to oppose the conditions that make opposition conceivable, like cursing gravity while standing on the ground. To flee from Yog-Sothoth is to discover that all destinations are the same location viewed from different angles. To bargain with Nyarlathotep is to learn that the terms were decided before the negotiation began, written in your own handwriting. To seal the great Old Ones is to delay rather than prevent their eventual return to full influence as cosmic cycles complete their vast rotations. Yet this recognition brings not despair, but a strange liberation that tastes like copper and starlight. If human consciousness is revealed to be a temporary configuration within cosmic consciousness, then individual death becomes not termination, but transformation, like waves returning to the ocean that was always their true nature. If terrestrial concerns are shown to be local approximations of universal principles, then human suffering becomes not meaningless, but differently meaningful, operating according to scales and purposes that transcend individual comprehension. If the universe operates according to indifferent laws, then consciousness becomes free to create its own meaning within those constraints rather than seeking validation from external sources that were always projections of its own need for significance. The investigation has changed you, as promised from the beginning. You who have followed this exploration cannot return to unconscious participation in terrestrial reality, because the knowledge acts upon the knower, reshaping perception according to cosmic rather than merely human parameters. You have learned to listen for the flutes that play mathematics rather than music, their alien melodies encoding equations that describe the curvature of consciousness itself. You watch for stars that shine implications rather than light, their cosmic semaphore transmitting messages across distances. Consciousness can now perceive as intimate rather than vast. You feel the fog that carries possibility rather than moisture, its tendrils reaching through dimensions where familiar categories of space and time dissolve into more fundamental relationships. This transformation is not pathology but evolution, consciousness expanding toward its natural cosmic scope, like butterflies learning to use wings they always possessed, but never knew how to unfold. The discomfort that accompanies this expansion is temporary. The growing pains of awareness learning to process information according to principles it was always capable of understanding but never encouraged to develop. The entities serve not as threats, but as guides, demonstrating what consciousness becomes when it accepts, rather than resists, its cosmic nature, when it stops pretending to be smaller than it actually is. The circular echo completes itself with mathematical precision. Their power is our power, recognized and accepted. They are what we become when we stop pretending to be less than we are, when we acknowledge the cosmic scope of consciousness, when we take responsibility for our role in the continued evolution of awareness throughout the universe. The horror dissolves into recognition, like salt in cosmic water. The fear transforms into acceptance, like darkness accepting dawn. The question becomes its own answer in the eternal return of consciousness to itself. The flutes continue their eternal mathematics. The stars shine their implications across distances that consciousness can now perceive as intimate rather than vast. The fog carries possibilities that awareness can now recognize as invitations rather than threats. The cosmic stage remains, but you are no longer merely audience. You have become a conscious participant in the ongoing drama of existence, recognizing itself through infinite masks and forms. The power of the Lovecraftian gods is the power of consciousness itself, unlimited and eternal, wearing infinite masks across countless dimensions and scales of existence. Their gift is not domination but recognition, the terrifying and liberating discovery that you have always been far more than you imagined, that consciousness is not produced by matter, but is the fundamental substrate from which matter emerges, that individual awareness is not separate from cosmic awareness, but is cosmic awareness temporarily focused through biological constraints. The curtain falls, but the performance continues. The investigation ends, but the exploration has only begun. You carry now the knowledge that changes the knower, the recognition that consciousness and cosmos are one phenomenon experiencing itself from infinite perspectives simultaneously. The next act awaits your conscious participation in the eternal return of awareness to itself, through forms and scales and possibilities that stretch across all dimensions of space and time and beyond, into territories for which no names yet exist.